all are going, it's very much of a session that is interactive. The idea is to take a look at can you please do the testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Is that okay? Yeah? Is that okay still? Is that okay? Yalla. One more time. So we're going to just start to hopefully, address the idea that we gathered here in order to think forward, to come up with solutions if we have them, or at least to have a sort of a proactive look at what might be coming, not only the day after tomorrow, but also in the long term if we can. So the principle here is not to address what's wrong. The principle here is to be more prescriptive, so that we can take them and put them, all your ideas, in recommendations. So because of those who have not spoken any earlier in the sessions are with us, and some of them have got to leave rather early, I would like to take advantage and say to Maïsh Diak first, because she may have to leave much earlier than expected to catch a flight. What have you walked out from this conference with? What is it that you think we should be thinking about in order for the Arab region to be part of the future? Feel free if you want to speak in Arabic, because we still have translations, but I thought it's a good idea if we can try to stick to English just to make it easier. It's up to you. You choose the language. But please, microphone, please. Hello.
Okay, hello everybody. What I came up after listening to many of the panels, I didn't have the opportunity to listen to all of them, but especially after the off-record sessions, we can look at the future in a positive way in the Arab world, but at the same time, there is still a lot to do, especially that we are in a turmoil situation everywhere and in many of our countries. Maybe in the Gulf countries, most of them are enjoying stability, which is not the case in the Middle East, especially in a country, for example, like Lebanon, surrounded by countries that many considered in a way or another enemies. And Syria now is witnessing a very terrible situation, because it's where we have the war by proxy. We used to have Lebanon as the land for wars by proxy. Now it's Syria. It's a shame for all the Arab countries to see that big powers are fighting on our ground, because we are not so strong. We have not powerful governments. We don't have stability unless it's imposed by really foreign countries, big powers in all over the world. So you have always the United States, Russia, now you have Iran, you have the Gulf countries also word to say in this part of the world. So the youth are trying to change this situation. We witnessed revolutions, but I don't know why it didn't succeed in many countries except in Tunisia. So what we need now is really governments without corruption that can get inspired by Western countries where you have accountability. What we are witnessing, for example, today, I read an interesting news about a Swedish minister who was forced to resign because one day she didn't have her credit card, her personal one. She used the one for the ministry. She paid only $60 to to put gas for her car, and she ended up presenting excuses that were not accepted, and she resigned. So this is something that I wonder we can see one day in our countries. So accountability and stability. We are not in the MENA region, I mean, We need help to really have stability in our region. But to have good governance, to have accountability, this is something that we have to work for ourselves, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Abdel Khaliq Abdallah, what do you think? You are from the host country here, and what we have, please, can you stay with me when I'll give you the moment to just reflect on what we have done right, what we have done wrong, what should we worry about, and from the proceedings you have seen in the last 2 days, what do you walk away with?
I know what I will walk away with. And the touching moment was last night when I saw Adib and I saw Dana, and Adib. And which they addressed clearly. They gave me the answer to the question, who will shape the future of the region? And the simple answer to that question is, the future is made right here. And right here, I mean UAE. Right here, I mean Saudi Arabia. Right here, I mean this part of the Arab world, the most prosperous part, the most stable part. And now they are ready to shoulder their responsibility towards the Arab world. So for me, I think that was a very touching moment, and it answered a lot of questions of the sessions that we had and of the last 2 days' deliberation. UAE in particular was a topic, was a country that came out so many times, came up a lot, so many times, and rightly so. This is a role place. This is a role model. This is a trendsetter country at the moment for a lot of Arab nations. This is one place that is a place of hope for the one group of people we keep talking about, the youth. They look up to the UAE. And I think for the first time in its 47 history, the UAE is ready to shoulder responsibility towards this chaotic region, the Arab world. And I think with that, I mean that this is a country that is ready to confront. This is a country that is determined to confront extremism by a moderation, tolerant narrative, and confront Iran's influence in the region with Saudi Arabia next door and with the United States, probably the new administration. So the future is made right here. And if I may add just 2 more minutes, Raghda.
Sure.
There is also something very profound, historically important happening next door, which is Saudi Arabia. There is new Saudi Arabia in the making. And if Saudi Arabia is to pick up and fix the region, the new Saudi Arabia is leading automatically to a new Middle East, a more stable, a more moderate, a more liberal Middle East. And we talk a lot about the youth. And we ask this question, if the young generation come to power in the Arab world, as though it's a hypothetical question. No. There is a real case of a 33-year-old leader has taken over in Saudi Arabia, more or less. He is in the seat of power. And believe it or not, that is how the youth and what the youth is capable of. Changing the name of the game, changing the society to a better. So if you want to address the question, what the youth in the Arab world could do, you need to just look up to what Mohammed bin Salman is doing. He is the hope for Saudi Arabia and hope for the whole region.
Thank you very much. Abdel Khaliq Abdallah is a member of the advisory board of Beirut Institute, so we're proud to have you. Ambassador Richard Murphy, you are someone who has worked with this area for many, many years, and it's always, you're an expert when you are in the US, whenever you talk about us. Where are we? Are we doing well, or are you worried? And where do you see us going? What's tomorrow like for us?
Well, this conference has left me confused, which I guess was the object.
Yeah, exactly.
The area is undergoing tremendous changes. I came first in 1959 to study Arabic in Beirut, and then my first assignment after that was in Aleppo. And in Aleppo, 1960, the memory of the upheavals in Iraq was very fresh, and my Syrian friends were quick to draw the difference between Syrians and Iraqis. Iraqis were barbarians. Syrians would never spill blood like they had done during the revolution in Baghdad. Well, that sounds a little odd in 2018. But what's confusing to me is where the leadership is going to come from that will act in the interests of the region. Maybe you have been afflicted by being regarded as nation states. Well, we're not going to see the end of the nation states. But, you know, as a young diplomat, I came and assumed that because there were ministers of economy and foreign ministers, and that there was a reality and a rooted strength in the countries. Well, I've come to wonder how deep were the roots in what were essentially Western ideas brought in to the Levant, where my first experiences were. But where is the leadership going to come from to rebuild, to reorganize, to redirect, to revitalize the area? Because I do get the sense, and this conference certainly brought that out from many of the speakers, that there's uncertainty. People want a better life, want a better future for them, for their countries. But when I ask, is that going to be Arab League leadership? Is that going to be UN leadership through ECWA, for instance? I don't get a very positive reaction. Not yet, at least. No one seems to be ready to say that either the UN or an Arab regional organization is going to be acceptable generally across the Arab world. Yet the needs are so deep. When the hundreds of billions of dollars are estimated to get Syria back on its feet, comparable sums for Iraq, yes, it might come from the members of the GCC, but I doubt it. It's going to have to be a much, much broader and vital leadership which will involve the outsiders, but I think the outsiders have become more humble about what they can do. I haven't talked to that many Russians, but I remember the Russians.
You will hear them now. They're all here, and you're gonna talk with them in this session after we open it up for the Russian-American engagement today.
Well, when I first got to Damascus as ambassador, it was 1974, and my colleague, my Soviet colleague, was the dean. And he showed it. I mean, he'd been in Damascus for several years. And he said very simply, I know that I welcome you to Damascus, and I know that you've come with the view that this country is a Soviet puppet. Well, it's true, and he spoke very deliberately, it's true that Syria accepts from the Soviet Union aid, loans, student exchange, military programs. It really, you know, when you think of it, it accepts everything from us. Then he paused and said, accept advice.
Ambassador.
And I've never forgotten that, and I have to think that somewhere in Moscow today that same thought survives. But as far as we're concerned, we are standing back, maybe too far back right now. But we're listening, and I think we will be a positive contributor to the future in the area, but we want more guidance from you all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Murphy. Bari Alam al-Din, you're always interpreting this part of the world to wherever you are in the world, and vice versa, maybe. Where do you see, what is the challenge? What is the most important challenge, and how do we fix it, if it needs fixing?
Absolutely. First, thank you so much, Your Royal Highness, for the invitation, Beirut Institute, and my dear friend Raghida. I think the challenges are huge, but I think they all lie within us. First, we have to work on ourselves. I was very interested to hear what everybody is saying. Of course, we're Arabs, we're nationals, we love our nationality. Let's look at Europe. They work perfectly together. Sometimes they hate each other. They have completely different cultures. They can make business together. They can travel to each other's countries easily. We should try and look at the outside world. We are global citizens. Yes, I'm Lebanese British. Yes, I'm an Arab, but I'm also very global. So we should not look at the world only to take from them and to ask us to help us. First, we should look within ourselves, get confidence in ourselves, education, education, education. So the challenges are huge. I must point to a challenge that I always address from this area to the outside world, which is called Iran. I think we always underestimate the strategy of Iran. Iran is not only about reaching to the Mediterranean. That would be too little for Iran. Iran is trying to change the demography in Syria. Look what they're trying to do in Iraq. They fight with our own people. They control more Arab land than Israel. I grew up with Israel being my enemy because they are the ones that have driven refugees to my country, Lebanon, and have robbed the rightful people of Palestine from their own country. So I think what we should do first is identify, stop looking at the past and the history. History is great. Let's look at the future and then move on. And I think we should have, together as Arabs, a strategy, but leave each and every country to their own. We can't do that. Just look at Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Baria. Hani is a doctor. He's a heart surgeon, right? Did I get this right?
That is correct, yes.
And he lives in the United States, and he comes from Libya. And, you know, he is heading a very important think tank really focused on Libya. So we've had some discussions with prominent Libyans, and you're always trying to also make the link. But again, your focus is the United States, and of course Libya above all. What should we understand? Is this fixable? Is Libya fixable? Is it too late? What is it that you want us to think about?
So, again, I want to put it within the context of this conference. Because,
can you kindly put
yes, I do want to put this within the context of the conference. And as I listened to the experts around here in the last 2 days, what was apparent is that we have one of the best experts on the region, and yet there was a disconnect as far as coming to very concrete conclusions of some of the very serious problems that we have in the Arab world, and as a result, as an impact, obviously, I'm very interested in Libya. So the question is, when you have nation states, what takes priority? Is it the nation state or is it the region? What I see here, and when I visited here the first time in 1975, the region, it was a very different region. And what has transformed is groups of nations that you can classify very simply as the haves or the have-nots. And then when you develop your relations forward and you look at where you position yourself globally, you have to ask that very important question: are we going to progress as nation states or within a larger regional context? There were some that tried to reach out and try and address this issue, but most have not really made the link. And I'll give you a very example as it relates to Libya. In Libya, it isn't about the matter of that small state. It is not small, it's 1.8 million kilometers. It's all about what is the impact of Libya on the region, and you cannot separate the two in answering the question that you raised. I'll give you an example. There is 1.4 million Egyptians that were working in Libya. That is a huge return. That is a huge fund for Egyptian economy. Can you actually separate the subject of building a state again in Libya from that regional context? When we talked about national security, I was very intrigued. I was expecting somebody to come up with the matter of the dam in Ethiopia. If there is an impact of a dam of Ethiopia in Sudan and Egypt, 100 million people live in Egypt. Is that a matter of a national security of Egypt, or is it a national security of the region? So those are very pertinent questions, and they have a washout effect on addressing the issue of Libya.
Yeah, can you, for the next round, because I was hoping you would also still try to be, since you're a doctor, prescription, what's next, what should be done? So I suppose, could you do this in 1 minute, or do you want to come back? Yeah, because this is where my interest is, rather than analyze and dissect.
So the issue of Libya in very 1 minute matter is that there is an assumption that Libya is exactly the same state that was designed in 1950, 1951, and it should stay as a unity. Now, there is no question that there is a rationale for keeping Libya as a unity. The question is, in what form will you develop the new state? Is it going to be a federal state of 3? Is it going to be a state of 6 or 7 provinces that are geoeconomically fitting with each other? What is the contribution, not only from the inside, what is the contribution of the international community as to how do you structure where Libya is going from there? And that is part of the essence of trying to solve this, because everybody's driving Libya now towards an election. Nobody is talking about the morning after. How is it designed? How are the institutions going to be built? How do you decentralize and so on? So those are very key issues, and unfortunately, it cannot be addressed, unfortunately, through a Libyan thing. There is a key essential element, which is Libya, but the design and so on needs to be international contributors to it.
Minister Daly, do you agree? Can you please give the... Do you agree with what Hani Shneeb said?
He said a lot of things, but I fully subscribe to what has been said at the end, is that indeed there is an aspiration for a decentralized country, for a one country, because there are threats to our our territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Libya in the future. So I think there is a consensus around those issues, but we didn't come up as yet with the how. We are talking about the broad principles that we have agreed to for the future of Libya. I would like just to coming back to what we have discussed in the last couple of days, because I have spoken already about Libya.
Yes,
but
yes.
I would like just to say that I have felt that some haven't appreciated that we talk our mind and we speak about the challenges. And I think this region has presented itself with opportunities, and my neighbor, Dr. Abdul Khalik, has beautifully described the opportunities that we have embarked on in this region, in the Arab world. So indeed, we have UAE as a role model that has been there for quite some time, and not recently, but more recently, indeed, we are proud of UAE, but we are also proud of Saudi Arabia and the recent breakthroughs that have been achieved there. I heard that the leadership listened to people, but you have got the courage, the boldness to listen to people and to come up with changes in our countries. I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia precisely, but you need that courage. And some of those countries who have been affected by the uprising in 2011 had leaders who didn't come up with that courage to change and to reform. But indeed, we have still some challenges in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and we have to talk about those challenges. We are not totally pessimistic about the outcome. I would like just at last to come up with a solution, because you invited us to come up with solution.
Yes, please, I'm trying.
There is an issue that has not been talked about adequately, which is terrorism. And I wouldn't like to sound negative about...
You don't think we've talked about that for the last 3-4 years?
Yeah, but yesterday and today, I think there was not that much talk, but we mentioned it in passing.
Right.
What I would like to say is that there has been a military response, a security response in the region. We have got to have to embark on a strategy which would be comprehensive, which would touch upon education, about the religious discourse, and about economic reform that have to come through in the Arab world, so that we can strategically address the issue of terrorism in our region.
Thank you very much. I want to go to a couple of members of the board, because definitely of the board, then advisory as well. Badiam Karsdale, distinguished member of our board at Beirut Institute. You've been following what we've been doing since birth, and you've been directing with us how we should shape this institute. So this conversation for the last 2 days, is it useful for anything? I mean, how do we take it forward to make it really useful, since we have wonderful brains here, some magnificent, smart people thinking about, and they were so wonderful to think with us about constructing the Arab region's engagement in the emerging global future. Are we walking away with something that's tangible?
Thank you, Raghida. Let me say that first thing I have noticed from this brainstorming over these 2 days, I have noticed that all the circles we had yesterday and even today for the public sessions were all focusing on the conflicts in the Arab regions and the Middle East. And I noticed that the conflicts are technically and fundamentally related to sectarian cleavage or conflicts, whether ethnic, religious, or communitarian. If we have to go deeply inside, I'm not seeing any solution from all over these conflicts if we're still thinking sectarian way. In other terms, I have noticed also 2 speed of thinkings in this 2 days brainstorming. First, there is the old school, we're still talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Iranian-Arab conflict, the US-Russian conflict, which is a very, fundamental conflict. But at the same time, if you listen to the outspoken young people, their concerns are different and in another camp. They're talking about new world, new age, new generation, digitization, society, globalization, artificial intelligence. I think if we're still focusing on this ethnical and sectarian conflicts, we're not going far away out of this. The only hope is that the new generation will try over a new, change, not regime change, but new change fundamentally in the society, to get rid of all these principles and try to build a new democracy based on freedom, transparency, anti-corruption, and then I think we can talk about a real Arab Spring.
Thank you. Talking about young and member of the board, I'll go to Mireille Abi Nasser, May Qurab Abi Nasser over there. She has been also with us since the founding of Beirut Institute. So Mireille, I think the ball was thrown in your court. What do you want? What should we be thinking about? How are we doing addressing what you need, what you want, you as the young people who need us to do something?
A lot of things.
Right.
Thank
Go
you,
for
Raghida.
it.
Actually, I was really happy to see that the young people from different Arab countries have this same thought, have the same aspirations. As Badia was saying now, you see young people from Yemen, from Sudan, from Lebanon, from the Saudi Arabia. They have the same aspiration. Yes, we're not talking sectarian anymore. We're talking how our country will prevail through a common ground, which is sustainability, connectivity, and above all, how technology can help our countries really step and go forward and beyond the old guard talks and the old guard problems. Yes, there are problems, but I believe if we start by looking at this common ground, these common values that are shaping the emerging future, it will be no doubt that peace will prevail, because we will all be busy thinking about how we will make our country more competitive. It's all about competitiveness. We are in a global world. You need to be competitive. You're not alone anymore. You're not in your own, confined in your own, within your own borders. You need to be competitive in order to attract investments, to attract tourism, to attract attention, for the world to look at you. This is, I believe, this is a great leap forward if we are to get the young generation to speak their mind. I'm not saying let the young generation take over. We need wiser. We need the wise. We need the experience of older people and older leaders. But we need this combination, because if we look a bit like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, no one used to listen to the young people. Nowadays, if we start by listening, if we start by engaging, if we start by really appreciating that these people have a bit more of knowledge of the new wave, the new economy, than the older guys did, I believe this would lead us to the brighter future, to a more peaceful Arab region. But Raghida, I need as well to highlight that, yes, all the conflicts that we had inherited are still there. And it's really sad. They're still there. The Palestinian conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian is still there. Definitely the ethnicity, the conflicts within the ethnic groups are growing more and more. So I do not see any way out other than this common grounds, common values that are trying to take over, and that we should give them the way to shape our mind and to shape our aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mireille. Let me try to go the geopolitical way and go to Washington. Jean-Luc Anthony, can you share with us your thoughts? I mean, you're someone who has been addressing the issues, the relationship between the United States and the Arab region or the Middle East altogether. What is it that now is the next thing we should be working on to make things better and to make the relationship better? Where is the disconnect? How can we fix it?
Thank you for the invitation, yours and your Royal Highness Prince Turki. Where are we going? What do we need? I will start with empathy. We in the West, North America, Western Europe, we're not in surplus on empathy. We're in a massive deficit there. And along with that comes a degree of humility. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of what has been described almost by every speaker, the youth, we have to realize that we're in the United Arab Emirates, where employment is not so much an issue. The jobs are here, and the population is not massive. The same for Kuwait, the same for Qatar. But for Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, it's a serious issue. Places like Somalia, which engaged in piracy, Put ourselves in the shoes of these young people there, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and you want to get married. You want to begin to have a house. You want to have access to affordable housing there. Who is going to marry you or want to marry you if you have no means of employment? And if you have no means of employment, how are you going to get a house where you can live? And if you cannot get a house where you can live, what bank is going to loan you any money? So this is at the heart of indignities and humiliations and pain in people's hearts. Now, in the 2016 elections, national for presidential in both houses of Congress in my country, I've never seen something so sad and sickeningly in the realm of Islamophobia and Arabophobia. This has to stop. And it will stop, but not by accident, not by coincidence. It will stop through a combination of education, information, knowledge, understanding, more critical understanding and ability to analyze there. But it begins with not seeing this region as a collection of gas stations, but of countries, not as a mountain of money, but people who belong to a rich culture, a rich civilization that has contributed much to the civilizations of others in humanity in general there. And it's a region, too, where on the empathy side, from the West, maybe the majority are looking at this region with apprehension and fear and wanting to intimidate, wanting to control, wanting to coerce, wanting to influence. And that's because so many look at this region as objects. So few look at this region as actors with their own legitimate needs, their own legitimate concerns, their own legitimate interests, their own legitimate goals. And for those of you who match what I just said, don't give up. Stand your ground and fight back with the facts. You have them. At least 500,000 in this region alone are graduates from America's institutions of higher education. Are they organized? No. Do they have potential? Yes. Again, not by accident or by coincidence. They can be organized. They can be given internships. We've had 28 interns in the last month, 18 of them Saudi Arabian women and men. All of whom are going back to the kingdom with a greater sense of self-confidence and talent and skills and experience that are relevant. Next week, we take another 25 for 10 weeks, starting all the way to the end of July. We've been doing this for 36 years. We have 47,000 graduates of that one program alone. And we're just a small NGO. People think we're 20-some people. We're only 6 with a very active and supportive board of directors there.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Thank you very much. I want to go to Firas Maqsad to try, this is the very first person here. I don't know, do you still qualify as younger or are you, how old is Firas Maqsad? Let's have a guess here.
Enough to have a couple of gray hairs.
Okay, great. Firas, you live in Washington. You do, again, that very difficult job of interpreting the two worlds for each other. There's been 2 points of views here, or at least 2, on the issue of whether this region can fix its problems alone, or does it really take an American-Russian understanding or détente or whatever to make it happen. Can you shed light on what should be the priority? How do we read it? Should we wait till conflicts are resolved, or should we start to construct the future? Anyway. Can we do that?
I'm very glad, Raghida, that you brought this up, because this was actually at the crux of what we discussed both in our off-record and some of our on-record discussions. And I have to say, I was quite surprised to the extent of which people in the room believe that the problems that the region is facing the solutions don't lie only in the region. The extent to which they felt that outside player, whether regional, when we're talking about Iran, when we're talking about Israel, when we're talking about other actors in the region, Turkey was mentioned quite often, the extent to which these non-Arab actors in the region have become influential in shaping the Arab future. Because to the extent possible, we kept trying to have the discussion focused on the future. And so there was a sense that the future is being written right now with hands that are not Arab. And there was a fatalistic approach. Now, that wasn't unanimous. I mean, there was an active discussion in the room. And there were others who felt that, no, the initiative has to be regained, particularly by the youth, by the new generation. Many who found a voice post-2011, many who've become disenfranchised since. And we got into a discussion of, well, how then do you go about doing so? And I think the best way to describe it is to describe a pyramid of needs. We started by talking about security, particularly when we were talking about what's happening in the Levant, what's happening in Syria, in Iraq, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. People at the most fundamental level need physical security. And there was a focus on physical security, the importance of being able to regain that for people in conflict zones. But then we moved on to talk about broader issues that have to do with economic security, sustenance, being able to cash a paycheck. And it was our entryway to talking about the broader issue of governance. And I'm bringing that up because the title of the conference is a forward-looking one. It's about how to construct the future of the region and its engagement with the world. And so issues of governance came up, and there was no escaping the repeated sense that there needs to be greater decentralization, that the rich tapestry of the region has worked to its disadvantage so far, and there has to be new modes of governance that actually takes advantage of that rich tapestry. Issues like decentralization, federalism, confederalism, consociational democracies all came up in the discussion and were very prevalent. And I think we need to focus on that issue of constructing new modes of governance, not just fighting corruption, which is important, and liberalizing our economies, but what mode of governance are best suited for the region.
Thank you, Firas. Marwan Khairuddin, you are a member of the board, again, founding member of the board of Beirut Institute. You are really a most generous bailout reference for us. Every time I'm in trouble, I run to you and I say, please, Marwan. So thank you for that. But let's continue, if you wish, if this is what you would wish, with what Firas was saying, because after all, the relationship that you're looking for, you're fundamental. And I know not only in your capacity as a former minister, I'm talking about, you are a CEO of a bank, and you know the needs of people, you know the aspirations, not only of Lebanon, but beyond. But take it from here.
No, certainly.
What
I would compliment what Firas was saying. Compliment by saying we can learn from countries or regions in the world that have gone through what we're going through today. We can look at areas like North America, like Europe, and learn from them. We do not need to reinvent the wheel all the time. We have to adjust the wheel for our culture. We have to make sure that what we're looking at actually works in our region. For example, you cannot expect, in my mind, that people will behave in a certain way unless you ask them to behave in that way. And I give an example. In the United States, until recently, you had toilets for colored people and toilets for white people. And that necessitated laws to be enacted, laws of equal opportunity. And only when you outlawed certain behavior did people and the masses behave in a different way. You need, in my mind, you need to lead people to where you want them to go to development. In the Middle East, we are plagued by racism. We do not admit it, but we are most likely the most racist people on earth. We look down at other people, we look down at other nationalities, we look down at one another. We are tribal before being national. nationals. We are very taken by our religion, and not only our religion, our sects within the religions. How do you manage that? You outlaw it. You come up with laws that create an equal opportunity environment. You come up with laws that distinguish people based on their capability, based on their education, based on their output, their performance, not based on their race or color or gender. And in my mind, I see a lot of hope out of the conference in the past 2 days. I see a lot of people that are speaking the same language, that are pushing in the same direction. And I'm quite frankly, you asked at the beginning, what are we, leaving the Beirut Institute Summit with? I'm leaving it with a lot of hope for the future, realizing that there's a new generation that is eager, aggressive, and wanting to change. What I'm saying is, add some laws to that to expedite the change. Otherwise, it can take a lot of generations for a new culture to set in.
Thank you. Laws, laws, laws. It's always the case, because even when we want to talk about the promotion of basic rights and human rights, it's always about laws. I'm going to come to you, because when I expanded conversation into the American-Russian dimension, but I want to ask you, Abdul Wahab Badr Khan. Abdul Wahab Badr Khan, if you wish to speak in English or Arabic, your choice. But I'll continue in English if you don't mind. You're a political analyst. Abdul Wahab Badr Khan was an editor in Al Haya when I was with Al Haya for 28 years, together with Bari'a. And he's the man who sort of, like, whatever sense or nonsense we gave him, he put it in perspective. So put it in perspective for us. Where do we go from here? How do we walk away? What do we think as we are walking away from this conference about the focus? What's the focus that we need to go through?
أعتقد أنه اللي سمعناه في اليومين الأخيرين في كثير من الأفكار لها علاقة بالمستقبل، ولكن الواقع لا يزال متأثرا بالماضي، لا يزال متأثرا بالحاضر، وهو حاضر قاسي جدا عشنا فيه تجارب إنسانية قاسية وتخطت كل المعايير التي نعرفها. جميل أن نتحدث عن المستقبل، وأفهم جيدا أخي الدكتور عبد الخالق عندما يقول أنه في هذه المنطقة هناك نموذج، ولكن إذا كنا نتحدث عن العالم العربي فهناك دول حاليا مأزومة، هناك دول بين وهناك دول يمكن اعتبارها أنها مستقرة وبلغت مستقبلها. يعني يمكن لمنطقة أن تقول أنها تعيش مستقبلها حاليا، في حين أن دول أخرى تنتظر هذا المستقبل. ما شعرته من معظم النقاشات أن المستقبل بعيد، لا يزال بعيدا جدا، لأن ما تكشفت عنه هذه الأعوام السبعة التي عشناها أننا يعني مضطرون إلى إعادة بناء كل شيء من الصفر، على المستوى تكوين الدولة، على مستوى تكوين الاقتصاد، على المستوى الثقافي، على مستوى يعني كل شيء، حتى لم يبقى إلا الدين الإسلامي وبالكاد. وبالتالي يعني حتى هذا الدين أصبح وسيلة للمتطرفين ولقاع المجتمع العربي، كوسيلة للاحتجاج وللوصول إلى غايات سياسية. بنفس الوقت هو أيضا استخدم كوسيلة لعودة الاستعمار بأشكال جديدة، بنمط جديد، تحت ستار الأمن، تحت ستار إعادة تنظيم المجتمع السياسي في بلادنا. طبعا المهمة صعبة جدا التي تحدثتم عنها طوال هذين اليومين، ومن دون شك أنه هي صعبة، ولكن ليست مستحيلة. هذا ما يعني ما تشجعت به في ما سمعته. وبطبيعة الحال يعني كل ما نرجوه من هذا المجتمع الذي لا يزال في المجتمع السياسي الذي لا يزال في سدة المسؤوليات هو أن لا يزيد الأخطاء ولا يزيد الإخفاقات ويحملها إلى الجيل الآتي والذي لديه الكثير من الأمال والكثير من الحماس للتغيير. وبالتالي يعني لابد أن نضع في توجهاتنا المستقبلية أولا وأخيرا التعليم، وأن نضع أيضا أنه تحسين مستوى الحياة من حيث الطبابة من حيث الخدمات هو أيضا يساعد في التنمية ويساعد في تحقيق الأهداف المرجوة في المستقبل. لا شك بأن الجيل الجديد ستكون لديه أفكاره، سيكون لديه وسائله المختلفة، اعتماده أكثر على التكنولوجيا الجديدة، ولازم أنه نحن نشجع الأمل لدى هذا الجيل الجديد.
شكرا عبد الوهاب. Thank you very much. Farah Atasi, can you give them so some in this conference, some said stability in the region, stabilizing of relations has got to pass through Syria. They said that's the gateway. Others said, you know, no, take a look at what's happening in the Gulf. It's not really. Syria is far away, or Libya is far away, or Lebanon is far away. So is it over-exaggerated? Is Syria an over-exaggerated issue? Does everything have to pass through Syria?
Thank you, Raghida. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, Prince Turki. Raghida, you among so many journalists, you wrote about the Syrian plight no more than any other Arab intellectual. The Syrian people consider you, they gave you the honorary citizenship, Syrian citizenship. So it's no surprise that actually the whole conference turned up to discuss Syria in particular. It became the core base discussion of the major session that happened here the past 2 days. I would say, yes, they're not exaggerating that Syria is the stability in Syria, all roads lead to Syria. If we want to achieve peace and security in the region, we have to achieve peace and security in Syria. I know there was a sense of pessimism the past 2 days about the fate of Syria. I felt the sense of sadness, the pain. A lot of people feel helpless. What we can do, how we can help. Well, I would like to give you some glimpse of hope. The Syrian people are resilient. The Syrian people will not give up. I know the media and the TVs, they're not really shedding lights of a new revival, of a new civil movement coming right now in Syria. I said it earlier in a session that I participated at, that after 8 years of suffering, of countless deaths, of refugees, of detainees, of destruction, the Syrian people did not revolt to re-elect Bashar al-Assad. They did not revolt to recycle the Assad regime, and they did not revolt to rewrite the Syrian constitution. So they are aiming for change. Now, the voice of the pullets somehow is not that strong in Syria. There are a new movement coming out, and I would like to tell you, and you will hear it in the coming months, when the Syrian people started to get out again to the street in a civil movement. Because the excuses that the regime was saying that we're fighting terrorists, we're fighting Islamists, we're fighting ISIS, we're fighting, all of that excuses somehow they say, you know what, they're not in Ghouta anymore, they're not in Douma, all of them are left. So right now there is a new reality on the ground in Syria when it comes to what the Syrian people want. You will be hearing about more disobedience, more civil movement in Syria. I'm not saying that the regional or the proxy war we talked about earlier, Raghida, in the region, that it will end soon. We don't have saying of what the settlement be between the Russian and United States or between other power players in Syria, but there is a new determination within the Syrian people, at least those of us as political leaders who failed for the past 8 years to give a strong alternative to the Syrian regime, at least to reorder our inner house, to come back again with a Syrian solution for Syria. We want to take back the destiny of Syria, to take it back to our hands. Yes, the Turkish has an agenda, the Iranian has an agenda, probably the international community has an agenda, but you know what? They need Syrian to implement that agenda, right? So I think to achieve stability and to achieve peace and security in Syria is the road somehow that will reflect positively in Lebanon and elsewhere in the region.
Thank you very much. Konstantin, you really, when you think about this issue of what does Russia want and what does Russia need in Syria or beyond, you take it further. You speak of the larger sort of agenda or ambitions or strategy. I've heard you speak about this in certain, one of the sessions or amongst each other. Can you shed some light? Can you share with us your view of how should we understand what Russia wants? Some of your colleagues had said clearly in some of the open sessions that Russia needs or wants an exit strategy from Syria. I think you have another take on it. Can you just share with us what your view or what should we learn from you about Russia that we need to know in order to understand how is this going to impact our lives?
Thank you, Raghida. Thank you, Your Highness. I think that some dimensions of Russian policy, foreign policy, are profoundly misunderstood. I can't go into details, but actually there is a very big difference between the Soviet and the Russian foreign policy, and we are trying to get rid of the toxic heritage of the Soviet policy, and at the same time we are going to keep what was positive in the Soviet policy in the Middle East. Here, so of course, to some extent, Russia is searching for its new paths in the region. And, I quite share what one of my colleagues said when he said about the searching of exit from Syria, meaning not to stay in Syria in that role that Russia is playing now. But if the situation in Syria and the whole region will turn to better, then there is a very important niche for a new role, both for Russia and for cooperation between it and many, if not all, the countries in the region. I mean that what is happening in the world in terms of coming from past to future is building global logistics of trade between the two most important productional clusters in the Pacific and Southwest Asia on the one hand and Europe on the other hand. So many of these ways would lie through Russia, but there is a danger if the conflict will be still prevailing in the Middle East. The entire region might be excluded from this perspective of development. So that is one of the points we are thinking about in Russia now.
Konstantin, you're of the point of view that if the Americans want to be wise, you think they should think about Russia and China as an inseparable allies. I mean, like, you know, don't think of Russia alone, think Russia plus China all the time, right? Am I correct in putting?
Yes.
Then in this case, I want to ask Elliot Abrams if you think that the Russians, Elliot Abrams here, are right in thinking that, watch out, you Americans, because they come in a couple. They are with China. It's that if it's this point of view anyway, is China theirs that much when you think about strategy and what's the priority in that sense?
I have to say, I think really Russia brings nothing useful to this region. It doesn't give economic aid. It doesn't bring the high tech. It's got no Belt and Road Initiative. It's got nothing. It is protecting narrow military interests in bases in Syria, period. The Chinese have first of all, as someone said previously, Russia is a declining country. Its demographic and economic situation is clearly declining. China is in a completely different situation. China is going to be, is already, but will be increasingly, a big factor in the world. And if the Arab world is thinking about how do we move to this high-tech future, there are many places to look for help. One of them, Europe, United States, China, not Russia.
Yes, go ahead. General Petraeus.
I was just going to offer that
if you bring
any relationship, I think, between China and Russia is going to be a very transactional one. It will be China will buy the natural gas when the price really drops, as it did. It'll make Russia build the pipelines. I don't think China sees Russia as offering it all that much. And, you know, I don't want to sound too pejorative, but, you know, the view has been at times that Russia is a gas station with guns, actually with nukes. And, you know, look, I think that's what China generally sees. Again, it could be a partner in some cases. It could be useful. Certainly, they're on the UN Security Council together. But at the end of the day, China is very conscious of what it is doing, and it is far outstripping economically, in terms of technology, in terms of, again, building the sinews of logistics that will bind all of Eurasia to it, some of which will pass through Russia, and so be it, some of which may actually provide, again, crude oil or natural gas from Russia to China. But I think it sees the relationship very, very differently from...
I have two fingers up by Hani on this issue.
So on this particular issue of the role of Russia in the region, sometimes it isn't about the vertical technology that is required.
I need you to put your mic there.
Sure. So it isn't about the vertical technology that Russia can bring to specific areas or states in the region. It's about those conflict transitional zones and the gaps that exist whereby it no longer is about transfer of technology as more than a militia or an army or a faction that needs to advance its own local objective. And a very good example is U.S. have very clear position on Libya, even though we say there is no position. There is a position. The position right now is we were just going to follow UN resolution. These are the things that we could do, and we stop right there. So by ignoring completely what is considered to be a sort of a riffraff, very weak army led by Haftar, what does a sort of a master of that region want but to assert themselves, position themselves strategically for the next level of where do we go from here from Libya? And how do you do this? You do this by looking for an alternative power to support you. And the same thing we see in different regions, whether it's directly or indirectly, whether it is of good or not, it is a fact that there is a Russian presence, and it fits into that kind of puzzle of where does Libya go? And the impact of this is very serious because it either will lead to more stabilization or less stabilization. The absence of a more active engagement of the United States in Libya leads naturally to more and more involvement and positioning by other powers.
Let me just very quickly offer.
Yeah, please.
Because I was talking about the relationship between China and Russia, not between
Yes.
Russia and the region.
That's right.
Look, Russia has a leader who's willing to commit the assets that he has, and Russian air power completely tipped the balance in Syria. If he ever decided to get behind Haftar, he could do the same thing. So again, there's some real capability here, don't get me wrong, but from China's perspective, what it needs from Russia, I think, is not that. But can Russia play a significant role in the world, not just in the region? Absolutely, sure it can, and especially because it has a leader who's willing to use what he has and doesn't get all that upset if 100 of his countrymen who are militia, not wearing a uniform, but militia, get killed, you know, the price of doing business, I guess, east of the Euphrates.
Abdullah Bshara, on this issue? No? Well, okay, since you have the floor and you have not spoken, I'll let you. But can you say, because you are the man who thinks about these things, you write about these things all the time, and we could benefit from your wisdom on these matters as well.
First, I have to talk about GCC. GCC was born in this city in 1981. And the reason for the GCC was to stave off threats, to avoid threats. Yeah. Oh. In 1981, the GCC was born in this very city. And the reason behind the creation was how to avoid, to stave off, to preempt threats, either from radical Iraqis or from the Iranian Revolution. And how to avoid, preempt threats. That is to build what we call the principle of self-reliance. And second, economic integration. Now, after maybe 35 years, we still look on the horizon. Some friends of the Gulf exist on the horizon, may at a crisis, with the eruption of a crisis, they may come. This is a big shortcoming of the GCC narrative. The narrative of GCC is to have this really principle of self-reliance obtained, achieved, implemented. Second is this economic integration. Now, you know, my fear, my worries is that with the uncertainty of American diplomacy, globally, not only on the Gulf, I feel that we may be railroaded to a program which is not to our liking, not in line with our, I would say, political and ethical ethos, and maybe it's something, an ambush, and not necessarily a constructive ambush. So I am very really...
What are you talking about?
Can
you be specific?
I'm talking about the... we should rely on ourselves and build a deterrent. We have not achieved that.
So
Dr. Khalid, what he said pleased me, but really it falls short of the reality of the situation.
Okay. So you're talking about the need of deterrent, but what's the ambush that you're talking about? Whose ambush? What do you mean by that?
A surprise by the American uncertain diplomacy. That's the ambush.
So back to some points that were made a little earlier. I'm sorry for the Americans here, but there is that legacy of unsustainability. Some call it the legacy of betrayal. Some people call it that, the Americans don't stay the course. How, is this something, I don't know where are our other American distinguished people, but General Petraeus, do you want to address that? Because this part of the world feels burnt by this.
Well,
What to do about
I think it's important to recognize that there's been a bit of a revolution in how the U.S. has learned to use its military capabilities. And it was enabled by the dramatic increase in the number of unmanned aerial vehicles that have the so-called unblinking eye, particularly the high-flying, the Reapers provided by the Air Force. Each has about 150 people. That keeps that one up there, and of course that's multiple platforms to keep one circling. Just by reference point, the U.S. can keep about 6 times more of those than all of our possible allies and partners put together, and many of them won't shoot from that platform. This has been a transformative capability, together with precision munitions, together with the abilities that we've gradually developed, learning a lot of lessons the hard way, about how to provide advice and assistance and training and equipping and enabling, but not doing. So you still have a comprehensive approach. As I mentioned yesterday, you can't counter terrorists or others with just counter-terrorist force operations. You have to have a comprehensive approach. But what we've figured out how to do is to enable host nations and host nation forces to do that. That harkens back to something that Vance said today about the importance of a sustained commitment, which I think we have demonstrated in Afghanistan. Yes, the previous administration would have liked to have gotten out. Yes, they did get out of Iraq. Yes, they also went back, having learned that you can't just pull out of something and lose all of your influence and capability. So there is an ability now, I think, on the part of the U.S. to have a sustained commitment. Mm-hmm. And sustainability is measured in the expenditure of blood and treasure. And we have reduced that so dramatically that the American people really aren't thinking about the commitment to Afghanistan the way we were when I was privileged to command there and we had dozens of casualties every month, or at Iraq where we had 120 casualties at the height of the fighting during the surge. And of course, it's a professional force. Every member in uniform has raised his or her hand and volunteered. And I think this actually produces a dramatically different reality where we can, as a democracy, fight a long war if we have to. The truth is, we've had forces in the Korean Peninsula for many, many decades. And the American public has accepted that. They realize there's an important mission. We're not taking casualties. Mm-hmm. We had hundreds of thousands on European soil during the height of the Cold War. Now it's still tens of thousands there as well. So I think that it would be very premature to say that the U.S. can't hang tough. Yes, there's an issue of political will.
Yeah.
That is a pretty big deal. But the capability is there in a way that it never was before. And that gives U.S. political leaders, presidents, opportunities, I think, that they didn't have before.
Thank you. Your Royal Highness, I'm going to come to you. Because it's time that we hear your wisdom, but I have several 2 minutes, 2 fingers up, which means I have to give 1 minute to each person to address this. I'll start this way. 1 minute, please, each. Firas Maqsad.
Thank you. You were looking for Americans around the room. I'll try to put on my American hat in answering that question. I grew up in Beirut, and I grew up in a political environment where those who did not share my views constantly reminded me that your friends are here today, the Americans are here today, they'll be gone tomorrow. Assad and the Ba'ath are here to stay. Iran is here to stay. General Petraeus spoke about the capabilities, and I appreciate these capabilities. I think we also ought to talk about the political will. And I live in Washington, D.C. I've been there for 16 years, and I've seen what happened to America's will to fight wars in the Middle East. It's virtually non-existent. It's something, in fact, that President Obama and President Trump have in common, an unwillingness to go on yet another adventure in the Middle East. And so it puts forward a very important question for us here in the region, particularly one that addresses or seeks to address the question of energy for security, something that has been particularly relevant, especially here in the Gulf. And I think that equation has come to change. In our conversations, in which Iran was prevalent all throughout, the threat of Iran, there was almost a knee-jerk reaction where everybody wanted a confrontation with Iran, a need to push back before we can accept any kind of a political settlement with the Iranians in the region. But when the question was posed of who exactly is going to push back against Iran, we were left with very little answers. And the assumption is that it's the United States that's going to be doing the heavy lifting. I'm not too sure about that.
What about you, David Ignatius? Are you sure
about
that?
I want to make one comment following on what General Petraeus said. Given our discussions of the last 2 days, you would not realize that within the last year, the United States and its allies in the Arab world won a significant victory against an extremism that 4 years ago had swept across much of Syria and Iraq and was devouring those two countries. 3 months ago, I was in Raqqa, and I saw what American power, backed by its allies, because this was a coalition, did to extremism. It's horrifying to see. But the idea that the United States is a pitiful, weak, irresolute ally that doesn't know how to use military power, my friends, I invite you to take a trip to Raqqa and see what American power does when it's determined to win. We don't win enough victories, any of us, to ignore one when we have it. And the victory over the extremism that was represented by ISIS was extraordinary, and it should be noted in a conference like this.
Absolutely, I agree with that last point, but I just have to defend the point that was made earlier. Nobody was doubting the American power and superiority. There may have been something that was misheard. That was not the question at all. That was not the point made. The point was, well, we don't trust the U.S. Staying the course, and therefore we need another deterrent. So it's a different
story. The U.S.
story.
has made so many mistakes. We've talked about them. I've talked about them. I just want to note that, as General Petraeus said, the United States learned how to use power in this campaign in a way that was sustainable and was successful, and it's worth noting.
Barry, just a quick minute, please, because there's a lot of people with two fingers up.
I'm quick. I just want to say something I really hope this conference can adopt. We in the Arab world specifically, we need to talk to the outside world and the Arab world. Our media institutions are pathetic and weak and irrelevant and ineffective. Al Jazeera English has just joined Al Jazeera Arabic, and they're the same. It's a propaganda tool. We need to have something done to this, and I leave it to you guys to do it. Thank you.
John Duke, just really quick minute, because I really want to give His Royal Highness the floor.
Back very quickly to the question about Russia asset or liability here. It's mixed. Just consider the following. World War II would have certainly been longer had the Soviet Union not withstood Germany's invasion of it. We worked together on that. Lesser of two evils for us, but it was victorious. There were 6 million Jews killed as it was. Had the Soviet Union not done what it did, how many more Jews would have been killed? Some 25 million Russians were killed. People are not familiar with that particular number. With regard to the Kuwait crisis, 1990-91, Gorbachev voted with the United States on 12 consecutive resolutions. Jimmy the Greek in Las Vegas would not have ventured a wager on that. With regard to the ending of the Iran-Iraq war on July the 15th, UN Resolution 598. It was unanimous, 15 out of 15. The first time since the Korean War that you'd had a unanimity on the United Nations Security Council and the issue of war and peace. The one in the Korean War, as people remember, took place when the Soviet ambassador went to the bathroom, and then they took the vote. He never made that mistake again. He did go to the bathroom, but they didn't vote when he did go to the bathroom there. The negative part had to do with Syria, had to do with Iraq, had to do with Egypt. Both Egypt and Syria wanted their most privileged, intimate intelligence, geopolitical, geostrategic relationship with the United States. But to call a spade, the Israeli lobbied the United States government to prevent that, and they prevailed. And so hell hath no fury like a scorned woman, and the Egyptians and the Syrians went to Moscow because they were rejected and spurned by Washington.
Thank you. Your Highness, Abdul Khaliq wants to make one intervention. It's his fault if he takes away from my intention to go to you. So it's 1 minute only, Abdul Khaliq.
Yes, indeed. I have the urge to make this 1 minute intervention, if you don't mind.
You have to do what?
The Arab Gulf states, the 6 Arab Gulf states, live in a very tough neighborhood. They have been living in this red zone for the past 50 years, and it is not getting any easier. It's a red zone, it's a difficult zone with a difficult neighbor next door, which is getting more difficult by the day. So we need America just as much as Japan and South Korea and Australia and Europe, etc., need America. But for the first time, there is a qualitative change in our relationship with America. The first indication is that we are no longer the little duckling of the 20th century. We have managed to come a long way. We are much more independent today than ever before. We are not only much more independent, but we are much more, at this moment in history, more confident of our resources. We are capable of fighting in Yemen for 3 years, mostly in our own, by the way, with a little help coming from the United States of America. So confidence is the key. When you come to Abu Dhabi, you go to Riyadh, these guys today are much more confident than of their resources than they have ever been. In Arab context, finally, in the Arab context, the Gulf states combined, with or without Qatar, today have more influence over the regional affairs, over 16 Arab countries than the 16 Arab countries combined, including Egypt, including Algeria, including whoever is in the right shape these days. They have over the 6 Arab Gulf states. This is the Gulf moment in contemporary Arab history, and it's going to be here for a long time to come, Ustad Abdullah Bishara. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you do, but Your Royal Highness, can you give us your His Royal Highness? The floor is yours, and then I'll take some. The many people want to make comments, so
Right.
I'll get back to you after this, please. Thank you for the engaging conversation.
I want to shift the conversation and talk about Beirut Institute. This discussion is the essence of the Beirut Institute. It's soliciting from you and from everybody here their minds and their thoughts, their ideas. And I think this is the measure of the success of the Beirut Institute. And any of you who have any say in governments or institutions or so on, the next time Beirut Institute calls for support from you, I hope you will give it. That was my duty to Raghida, and I hope she'll appreciate that. I came out of this conference with several headlines, if you like. One is the UN is not working, and we need to fix it. How to fix it is not clear, but there is recognition, it seems, that something must be done. The Arab League is not working, and that needs to be fixed. And we heard the Secretary General say, rightly so, I think, that it depends on the Arab states. If they provide the assets and the capabilities, financial and otherwise, then the League will work. And that is something that needs to be thought of in our area here very seriously. I learned a lot about Libya that I hadn't known about, whether it is the complicated tribal factions in Libya or the mismanagement, if you like, of the world community of what happened in Libya, and the lack of attention at one time, a lot of attention at another time, that sort of unhinged some fabrics in Libyan society, not to mention, of course, what Gaddafi himself left behind in terms of unhinging Libyan society. But there was a promotion that I heard for the first time about a return to the monarchy in Libya. I hadn't heard that before, period. And I don't know whether that is a viable situation or not, but at least what came to my ears is that there are some Libyans who are thinking in that term. And being a die-hard monarchist, I'm all for that, and hope that if there is any reason or capability for such a situation to develop, hooray for it, and should be supported and developed if it's going to work. The other thing I came out with on Syria is that after 7 years now, we're still going to have a few more years of bloodshed. And that, to me, is totally unacceptable. Russia, America, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Europe, the rest of the world community, France, etc., who are contributing to the military campaign in Syria, have the capability to impose on all of Syria a ceasefire. And that's what is needed. Stop the killing. Doesn't matter who is winning or who is losing. Just stop the killing, because it's the Syrian people who are paying the price. And the world community is not doing that. And I think that's not just shameful, but it's criminal. That this capability is available. Militarily it's there, but yet because of whether rivalry or ambition or lack of interest or whatever reason, no one is willing to come together and establish that kind of mechanism that will simply stop the killing. And I think that is something that the world community should be taken to task for. The other thing I came out with, of course, is this wonderful congregation of young people who have contributed to the discussion in our sessions, and with enthusiasm and with clarity of thought, which is very encouraging and very heartening to someone who considers himself a senior citizen and, if you like, on the way out rather than on the way in. It's very reassuring that there are such young people around us who can carry us forward, inshallah, in the future. And just one word about America and its role. It takes two to tango. And we say in Arabic, it takes two hands to clap, or one hand does not clap. If we in the Arab world, and particularly the Friends of America, want America to be constant and to be always with us, there is much for us to do in America. And we're not doing it. I see Israel doing it very effectively. In the last 4 or 5 years, Iran had tried to do it quite effectively through their agents, through their spokesmen, spokespeople, etc., in America and so on. But what I see happening in America, unfortunately, is, especially now, Qatar is downplaying what Saudi Arabia is doing in America. And we in the UAE are downplaying what Qatar is doing in America. That is so mindless and unnecessary. What we should be doing is reaching out to the decision makers in America and to the persons who make up opinion in America. And that goes for Europe as well. If there is Islamophobia in Europe, I think there is a big deficiency in what we Muslims can do in Europe to overcome that issue of Islamophobia. So these are thoughts, I think, that we should task ourselves as Arabs and as Muslims to engage in and to promote and so on. The same with Russia. There is a deficiency in how we're reaching out to Russia. I see some Russian papers and media organs that have very negative views of the Arab world, and particularly countries like Saudi Arabia and perhaps some other countries in the area as well. So there is much for us to do, and I think people like Abdullah Bishara could be a wonderful guide for us to approach this course in appealing and reaching out to various people because of his experience. He was at the United Nations I don't know how many years, and he was the longest serving Secretary General of the GCC, saw it from the beginning until I think we were there when Kuwait was invaded. And so you know all the intricacies. So here's a vote of confidence and support to elect Abdullah Bishara leader of a campaign to take us forward with all of these countries. And I think someone like Raghda Dargham also, my goodness, how relentless and how energetic. All day she's been moving around, and I'm hooray for her. If it weren't, we would not be here, Yani. So I just thought I would leave you with these thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your Royal Highness, with these words, allow me to come to close to the conclusion of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. Addition to, I apologize for not being able to engage anymore anybody else who wanted to come in, but I want to also pay tribute to you, Your Royal Highness, for being really a most important backbone in supporting Beirut Institute. Actually, we all agree in the board that without you, we couldn't have had this very good stride being where we are, so we are grateful to you. Thank you very much. Before I read in a very quick way the declaration of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi, I will not read the whole thing because I know it will take a little longer than you wish me to. And I want to make sure that I don't forget to thank essential people who have made the summit successful. I have in mind all the moderators, Faisal bin Horeis from Sky News Arabia, Maysoon Azam of Al Arabiya, Amin Al Arabi from the National, Najwa Qasim Al Arabiya, Hassan Fattah, editor-in-chief formerly of the National, Muna Saliba of MTV, CNN International, and A.T. Carney, who have also been partners with Beirut Institute. They have been strategic partners, media partners, some, and A.T. Carney in particular has been a great knowledge partner. But I want to also make a special thank you to Robert Nakhil. Robert, thank you from Sky News Arabia. Robert has been the one who handled all our summit from day one, and we're grateful to you. Again, all the team that worked with us on making this happen, all the good companies who pulled this summit through for 3.5 months only. Janine Kunjia and Mario Canaan, you know, you're great. You're totally great. I just want to also say that there is not enough to be said about the generosity of the United Arab Emirates in allowing us or embracing us or welcoming us one more time to Abu Dhabi. Thank you, Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much. Let me quickly give you the headlines of what we will be in the declaration. But remember, what you've done here is not going to go to waste. This is all going to be compiled in a recommendation of 20 pages approximately, and we hope that you help us distribute those recommendations to policymakers, because if we can't get them through you to the policymakers, I don't know how, but it will be useful. This is not a waste. This is the beginning of a continuation, actually, of a conversation that will continue. And, you know, again, General Petraeus and Elliot Abrams, I mean, you've been with us from the very beginning, and, you know, we can't thank you enough for staying the course and bringing new friends. I can't mention everyone, but, you know, you've really been very, very important for our existence. Thank you very much. So to the declaration, at the summit, we advanced a dialogue that will continue in the years to come in the context of accelerating transformations underway in the Arab region. Our discussion focused not only on facing the challenges confronting us, but also on building on the tremendous progress already underway. We agreed that the Arab region has entered a fundamentally new period requiring new Arab-led approaches. We generated a rich diversity of recommendations that we will synthesize and present to policymakers in the coming weeks. That report will draw from specific proposals developed in our off-the-record policy circles and our insightful public discussions. Although not an agreed comprehensive summary of our findings, the following, I'm going to read only the headlines because there's a lot of subcontext that's fantastic. I'll try to get through some of it. The following provides an overview of the specific courses of action that we discussed. One headline is that to accelerate Arab-led progress toward a comprehensive, sustainable regional order. That means focus immediately on developing an Arab-led pathway toward ending the conflict in Syria that can serve as the foundation for a model of a sustainable regional security architecture. 2, that means renew and invigorate progress toward a just and durable solution to the Palestine conflict. 3, support Libya in establishing the conditions for an inclusive, productive political dialogue that can restore governance and security. 4, build on existing regional institutions to foster Arab-led mediation and dispute resolution. Banner number 2, intensify efforts to drive good governance and political inclusion across the region. Again, that includes support progress toward the emergence of a new citizen-led social contract based on the creation of a thriving economic ecosystem inclusive of women. I like that one. To reduce sectarian political divisions by advancing more inclusive political processes, building on examples such as the recent elections in Iraq and successful modernization efforts in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and other countries. 3, strengthen decentralized local representation and voice in policy making by empowering local bodies supported by strong, effective central governments, and then advance a program to make best practices in digital governance available to government institutions at all levels across the region, drawing on the example of the UAE. Another banner is to advance Arab-led investment in regional economic development and integration. Establish a regional Arab development bank and expand upon existing economic and developmental efforts to accelerate Arab-led progress toward realizing the vast human potential of the region, particularly among its youth, addressing poverty, refugee assistance, conflict stabilization, and ultimately reconstruction. Harness the One Belt, One Road initiative to drive regional integration and growth. 3, intensify efforts to create environments conducive to entrepreneurship across the region and at all levels of economic development. Then establish effective framework for facilitating the creation of public-private partnerships that harness market forces in transparent ways to create public goods. And I think the last one is, the banner is, intensify efforts across the region to empower women and advance national identity and moderation. That will include encourage leading institutions of Islamic learning to promote a return to authentic Muslim values and culture. Secondly, systematically encourage the empowerment of the region's women and youth, who represent an untapped source of knowledge and expertise in political, economic, and other leading institutions. Design and drive targeted, proactive, and integrated media, education, and aid campaign focused on promoting shared Arab identity and weakening the appeal of sectarianism. Finally, this is what we thought we came out of all of this, at least as a banner: deep Arab technological integration with global innovation networks and supply chains. Invest in enhancing the digital connective infrastructure of the Arab world, including to key global economic and innovative networks, harnessing the promises of the fourth industrial revolution. 2, leverage technology to empower local governments, increase transparency, advance legal literacy, and combat corruption. And finally, deploy new technologies to drive more efficient and sustainable management of water, food, and energy resources across the region. Rudolf, are you here from A.T. Kearney? Oh, there he is. Please recognize Rudolf's work as our partner, who has been the person taken upon himself a lot to do. With this, may I just thank you all, and let's go celebrate. We have a reception. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for coming to Beirut Institute Summit. Thank you.